Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the ROS Media platform. My name's Andy. If you haven't met me before, I'm in charge of the platform here. And I'm back again with my good friend Ian Clifford, who is the founder and the president of the Republic of Old Souls, also responsible for all of our protocols as well. So the Monopoly Game Changer protocol is our flagship. And what we're going to talk about today is something that is probably close to many people's hearts, financially speaking. We're going to talk, or we're going to certainly take a look at, I would say, the biggest financial contract that most of us will ever sign, which is a mortgage. Now, most people think that a mortgage is simply a loan where the bank graciously lends you money to buy a house, and then you spend the next 25 years working to pay them back. But what if the bank never lent you a single penny of their own money? What if your own signature actually created the wealth that funded the entire house that you bought? So today we're going to pull back the curtain on what we are calling the mortgage discharge protocol. We're going to show you exactly how there's been some smoke and mirrors here regarding those mortgage notes that you've signed at the highest level of the global financial system, and that there is actually a doorway open for you to legally balance and discharge that mortgage debt. If you want to know how this actually works and how to protect your home from foreclosure actions, then this episode is going to be your blueprint. So really excited to dive into this with you, Ian. Maybe just to begin with, a good thing to do here would be just to sort of initially go into the details of where it all started. So this banking secret, how people's signature actually creates the credit in the first place. A lot of people just assume, don't they, that the banks act as these middlemen. They take the deposits from savers and they lend them out to home buyers. Why is that sort of classical view that I had, that most people have of banking? Why is it completely wrong based on not what we say, but based on modern economics?
Well, it's a perception and a reality duality. So, there's the perception of what people think is going on with banking and mortgages and loans and credit. And then there's the reality of what's really going on. And then there's the duality of the two. They are diametrically opposed to each other. There's the reality, which is what we're going to talk about today. And then there is the perception. And the perception prevails because most people, and that includes the so-called professionals, never actually ask the question, where does the money come from? And it's a simple question that very few people ever ask, and including me. When years ago, when I'm managing money, I'm a wealth manager, I'm a fund manager, I'm structuring, doing financial engineering, I'm working with money on all different levels, but I didn't actually ever ask the question, where does it come from and how does it get there? Because the professionals aren't taught it. Although the information's there, nobody seeks it out unless there's a good reason to do so. There is like a fear. The majority are fearful about actually trying to understand what's going on because they leave that to the so-called professionals. So it's an extraordinary paradox for me that the modern slavery system, which is the modern banking system, is mostly ignored from an analytical point of view. Hardly anybody looks into it. Those that do sometimes come up with the wrong conclusions. Those that have studied it, like Professor Richard Berner, are censored because the information, those that run the cabal, the banking cabal and the control agenda really don't want people to know how the money system works. And then you've got, people like me that come out and break it all down and strip it back and try and, make it, so that people can understand what's going on with the money system, and B, actually practically have a solution that can be turned, into a benefit is very, very unusual. I mean, there's hardly anybody in the world that's doing what we're doing. So, this is a niche subject that we're talking about today. This isn't mainstream. We've got, we've got a lot of people who take the money system for granted. They seem to be doing all right. So why question it? It seems fair. The banks appear to be lending money for loans, credit cards, mortgages. Surely they deserve to get paid back, don't they? And surely they deserve to charge interest because they're taking a risk, aren't they? So the perception of how the system works by the majority is another reason why they don't question what's going on with the money system. It's only when people get themselves into difficulty that they start to look into it, in my experience. They start to question it. Is there a chink in the armor of the money system that they haven't noticed before? But they tend not to look unless they get themselves into difficulty. And then they try to challenge it on every level, and most of those challenges never work because they don't really understand it. And it's not easy to get your head around it. But, I think the easiest way of looking at this is that there used to be a money of substance system that was gradually phased out because it didn't serve the control agenda. Now there is a money of account system. It's just an accounting system, really, where the banks are operating as trustees for the living souls. But whilst they're acting as trustees, they're actually pretending that they are the creditors. And they get away with it pretty much in the way it's been engineered. They largely get away with it in the courts. They get away with it in public opinion about what they're doing, because the perception is that they are lending money and taking a risk. So, even though people don't like the banks very much, they kind of say they're a necessary evil. Let's let them carry on with what they're doing, because without them, we can't get a mortgage, can't get a loan or a credit card. And for all those reasons, it's not really looked into until people are either enlightened because they come across information which challenges their worldview and they want to understand it more, or they're in the last chance saloon. They've got problems with debt and they want to understand how to get out of those problems. So it's the system that operates is a lot different from how the majority perceive it. The reality is there is no money of substance. It is the living soul's energy that is being used by the banks. The banks are operating as nominees, as fiduciaries. The system is constructed so that new credit is created, or new money, as many people want to call it, is created through lending. So the perception of banks lend out deposits is not wrong, but the definition of deposit is not understood. What actually happens is the customer deposits their energy as a brand new deposit, brand new issuance of what's called a negotiable instrument. The banks take that in, they call it a deposit, but it's not really a deposit in the sense of it never existed before. It's a brand new promise. They take it in as an asset. They can, because of the accounting exemptions that banks have got, they can create a debt equal to the asset. So the asset comes in on one side of their balance sheet. Let's say it's $1 million. That's a deposit of energy. That's a promise to pay in the future. And on the other side of the balance sheet of the bank, they can create a debt. And that's how the money, which is all debt, gets created. So it never existed before. Only banks can do this. The banks are operating as nominees stroke fiduciaries for the living soul. The energy then moves into the system. That, if you add all that energy together, it's the world debt. The whole system is operating in a bankrupt trust. The banks are expanding the money supply, 97% of it, through lending. They can't lend until a deposit's come in. That deposit can only come in through the signature of a living soul through the birth certificate construct, which is the banker, because the way that the framework's been created is that the living soul is the source of energy, but they are the agent for the banking entity, which is the person, the citizen. And that banking entity, as confirmed in the Bills of Exchange Act of 1882, can issue negotiable instruments, promises. Those are the deposits that the banks are lending out, but they're not actually lending them out directly. They're just creating a debt, and the debt comes with interest, which of course enriches the banks and enables them to do all sorts of financial engineering called securitization and investment banking modeling and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, a bit of a long answer, but yeah, it's a subject which I've immersed myself in, and I think it's a subject which, in my opinion, if anybody's got a debt and they don't want to know how it's working, then I'm very surprised by that.
I mean, when I first learned about this, it really shocked me. I have to say, it was a real paradigm shift for me, because I thought money was real. I thought the banks lent it out, and that's why they charged interest. But if the banks don't provide pre-existing capital to fund loans, mortgages, credit cards, why does the legal system treat the living human being as a debtor instead of the primary lender then?
Well, the legal system doesn't really care where the money came from. They just care about has the bank got a contract? Have they got a charge over the asset, like it's a property? The legal system doesn't really care where the money comes from, because the way it's been dressed up, and it's very clever, is that the mortgages are created at the consumer level by the clearing banks, but they quickly sell the deposits on. They quickly sell those securities on and move them out of the local jurisdiction, the local country, and move them into securitization tranches, which is typically going on in New York. So they shift the problem. They quickly sell it on before there can be any challenge. The mortgage providers then rely on the fact that they have a charge on the property. And if you go to court and say, hey, the bank didn't lend me any money, the courts are going to say, the judges are going to say, well, we don't care about that. Is there a charge on the property or not? Yes, there is. So you've got to pay. You've got to do what the bank wants you to do, which is to pay them back. We don't care how they created the money. That's beyond their remit. The judges don't care in the local area, local courts. Is there a charge? Yes or no? And that's all they look at, which is how the banks get away with it, because they've separated the actual financial engineering, which reveals that they're not creditors, is not in the local area. It's not in the local court. It's not at the clearing bank mortgage provider level. They shifted that problem away, and they're relying on the fact that they know that the courts typically are just going to say, is there a charge on this property? Yes or no. If there is, and if it's been affected correctly, then the courts and the judges don't care how the money was created. They literally just strike it out, and they don't want to know. But that's not the case if you can look at it from the top down, which is what the protocol does. It turns it on its head. It says, okay, where is the Achilles heel of the bank? And it's not in the local mortgage provider area where it all begins. It's what they do with those securities, which is where the Achilles heel is. And many people have even tried to, including me, I had a go at this a few years ago, saying, look, the banks don't have a legal charge, they have an equitable charge, they're holding the property, they're bailors, because it's like a trust. They don't actually have a legal charge, they only have an equitable charge over the property, and you can try and challenge the mortgage on the basis that the charge isn't strong enough, and the mortgage provider doesn't really have a standing at law. Well, that was defeated in War versus Bank of Scotland, where a precedent was set where the War family, WAUGH family, they lost against Bank of Scotland on the basis that they said that the bank didn't have a legal charge. The court decided that the bank had an equitable charge, and that was sufficient for them to retain their position. So that argument was defeated. There's been arguments about the registration gap, because when the banks create the mortgage and when they get the charge, there is a gap between the mortgage being created, the charge being taken over the property. There is a registration gap. That's also been looked at in great detail in the courts, and that is also being defeated as well. So that the mortgage providers, the two big challenges that they've ever faced, they've won them both. And the only case that's ever won in a local courtroom where the plaintiff, which was a mortgage customer, an alleged borrower, argued that the bank never lent any money because they created it from his deposit, was the Credit River case from the 1970s, where the judge actually agreed with the plaintiff being the mortgage borrower in common parlance terms, and handed judgment down in favour of the mortgage borrower, which of course was then, the whole thing was erased from history. Both the judge and the plaintiff disappeared, strangely enough. So that's the only case. It's called the Credit River case, where a local court actually agreed with the mortgage or the borrower that they had never borrowed any money because they provided the credit that the bank used. But that was the only case in history, and it was kind of scrubbed from history straight afterwards. So.
And people disappearing is never a good sign, is it? Certainly, you're over the right target when things like that happen. But I mean, what I'd like. Sorry, carry on.
What a cascade of, there would have been potentially millions of cases where people who said, "Look, Credit River case is won in favour of the borrower, so my case is the same," and it would have given the courts a massive problem. They had to stamp it out and get rid of it before it became, like a contagion problem for the courts and for the banks.
Yeah, no, that would have been a huge case precedent for sure. I mean, you spoke about this pyramid of the banks. Most people will think of banks. They might think, okay, I get it that there's investment banks. I get it that there's the clearing banks, the high street banks as we know them. The Santanders and the Barclays and the TSBs of this world. But what you're saying is that there's this separation, this sort of split title, as we call it. So how did the investment banks do that? There's mention in your documents of Seed and Company, CEDE. So the Seed and Company, where they kind of hide our names behind this institutional wall, and then they just treat our signatures as abandoned property, capture the profits for themselves. So maybe for people watching this for the first time, if you could explain that pyramid, in that we're not looking at this from a high street level. We're not saying, well, I didn't borrow any money from Lloyd's, therefore my mortgage is void. We're talking the top of the tree here, aren't we? It's sort of the very apex of what's going on. So maybe you could just explain that pyramid and how it works, and where institutions like Seed and Company come into this split title.
Well, the mortgage is always created by a clearing bank. They're clearing, basically they've got a accounting exemption. They can take in these promises to pay, the contract signature that creates the deposit of human energy. They can create the mortgage as an accounting exercise. If you look at Professor Richard Berner's work, can banks really create money out of nothing? Well, it's not really out of nothing, it's out of the signature. They've got a commitment, they've got a signature from a living soul through the banking entity, being the birth certificate construct. That then generates this debt creation model, where the banks know that that's that debt that they have created that enables the bank's customer to refinance or buy a property with the mortgage. They know that if they hold on to that security, then that could be challenged in the local country. So what they do is they sell it on within 3 months. Typically, it's like a hot potato. They don't want it anymore. They can make profit by selling it. So they sell it to the investment banks. The investment banks typically operate in and around the New York area. And now what's happening is that those loads of mortgage securities are being tranched. They're being put into portfolios. The banks, the local banks, the banks that provided the ex nihilo credit creation model, they sell the securities on. The investment banks bundle these securities together into tranches. They have to register them, and they do that at the depository trust company, and then that's moved into a subsidiary of the depository trust company that becomes a nominee for these tranches. That's seed and company. So they operate as the registrar of all these tranches of mortgages, and the investment banks they get to use those tranches. They can hypothecate them. They can make more profit. They can use the collateral value of the tranches as if it was their collateral. So like if you've got an asset, you can go to another bank and say, this is my asset, can you give me a loan? Well, the investment banks can do that interbank. They can do that with each other, expanding more and more supply. They can use the tranches as if they belong to them. Of course, they don't belong to them. That's the hypothecation, using the assets that actually belong to the living souls as if it were the bank's asset. They can offer it up as collateral. They can leverage against it. They can multiply up, and they can make profit by using the credit energy of the living souls of the people. That's what's going on. And the reason why, there are 3 reasons why this model works the way it does. The first is that the whole thing is an accounting-based money of account model. It can only work this way. It can't work with money of substance because there isn't any money of substance. The second reason is that the banks can massively profit from the model, the accounting model. And the third reason is that they're virtually impenetrable because they have shifted they've divided the mortgage up into 2 components. There's the charge, which invariably can never be defeated at the local, wherever the borrower lives. If they go to court in their local area and challenge the bank, hey, you guys didn't lend me any money, this is egregious, you sold my mortgage note on, there was no loan, there was no valid contract, there was no consideration, there was no valid charge because there's a registration gap. There's precedent after precedent after precedent in the local courts where the banks always win. So they pretty much are impenetrable in the local area. All you can do is store them. You can buy time. You can use tactics to stall, but you can't really defeat them because the real problem is being shifted. They've shifted it into New York. That's a different country. It's a different jurisdiction. You're now talking about your Deutsche Banks, your Morgan Stanleys, your Goldman Sachs, your Credit Suisses. They've got some of the best lawyers in the world working for them. Yeah. They've disguised it. They've hidden the mortgage securities under these street names at Seed & Company. Most people have no idea what's going on. It's like a big black box. Very few people ever challenge it. Those that do challenge it don't really understand what they're doing, don't know how to forensically challenge the model. It's hardly ever been challenged. We are doing it now there are pilot schemes going on which are making very good headway. But it's typically that the banks rely on the fact of ignorance, really. The borrower is ignorant. The borrower is only going to use arguments that always get defeated. The real argument never gets presented because it doesn't work in the local court. the only way to beat the mortgage market is to expose its Achilles heel, which is that they, at the top of the ledger, they're not the creditor, and you need to discharge the mortgage at the top of the ledger. And that's the only way that I can, having looked at it for some years and having tried many different attempts to try and void and discharge mortgages, the only way you can do it is at the top of the ledger, unless you do what they want you to do, which is to work hard for 25 years, pay them a bundle of interest, and pay them off the principal, even though they never lent you anything in the first place. So there's only two ways to do it: discharge using the very nature of the system against them, or work your tail off for 25 years and pay the buggers back. In a usury, in a profiteering, racketeering system, is you either join with them on it and sort of aid and abet them in doing it, and you get your house paid off, or you use financial engineering, which is the route that I prefer.
And I'm sure when people know how this works, that will be the route that they would prefer as well if they had the option. But my goal with these interviews is to help people understand this from the layman's perspective as well. So what I want to do next is I want to go into the Form 945 tax module, because I don't want people to think that we are reclaiming, recouping, refunding, whatever they want to call it, the mortgage note, the loan agreement, and the amount that was attached to that, because this is to do with tax redirection. I know that, you know that, but many people watching this won't understand what that is either. And in terms of what's actually going on right under their noses, the best way that I could describe this, and I've said this on other videos, is, and if you're watching this, imagine you had a really expensive luxury vehicle, and you went and parked that at a valet service for them to look after that vehicle. You were going on holiday or on business, maybe you're gone for months on end. So you pay the valet, you go on holiday, and while you're away on holiday, they decide they're going to rent your car out to other people, let them drive it around, profit on the back of that, all the while you are actually paying them for the privilege of looking after your vehicle. That's kind of what's going on here to some extent, if that makes a little bit more sense for people. You're the one that has the asset, you have the rights to that, the banks are profiting off that, the investment banks are profiting off that. So just to kind of dig a little bit deeper into that, and this is the bit that I think people will really start, maybe have a bit of a light bulb moment here and recognize that actually they do have rights to this, that it's not the bank's property, because there's something going on what's called this Form 945 tax module that you call the smoking gun. This is the bit that really exposes the fact that they do not own that credit, because they're doing something that they don't want you to know about. So let's talk a little bit about that. What is it about this 945 module that is so important for people to understand it?
The investment banks, they're nominees. They don't want you to know that they're nominees. Nominee is basically a fiduciary. So they're looking after the credit, but using it in this user-fruct system. So they are using your energy, if you've got a mortgage, for their own profit, whilst charging you for using your energy. But because the whole system, and this is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated, in the whole system is in bankruptcy. So if the system wasn't in bankruptcy, the banks couldn't do this. What happened was, in 1933, the entire monopoly board system, because it is like an artificial monopoly board trust, a worldwide trust, goes into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which means that the United States as a corporate entity went into bankruptcy and was bailed out by the banking cartel, the bloodline banking families. So they became the creditors. And the United States as a corporate entity and everything else over the next, well, it sort of goes in two big jumps. 1933 to 1944, the Bretton Woods Accord, where the vast majority of the more developed countries also went into bankruptcy in 1944. And then there was complete decoupling of money being backed by anything of substance in 1973, which was when Nixon took the gold away completely, because it used to be gold backed. And then it became more of the petrodollar in 1973. So that, and by the way, you know, oil doesn't back money either. So it was just that the US had become very dominant as a way of clearing transactions through the US dollar being the reserve currency. But if you go back to the bankruptcy, so you've got creditors on one side and you've got debtors on the other side. Well, the banks are nominees, but they're also debtors. You see, they are using the credit energy, the signature of the living souls, creating these mortgage securities. And they are actually debtors to the bankruptcy of the United States. So they have to pay taxes for the use of the collateral that actually belongs to the original creditors. So right. This is what's going on. The credit energy of the living soul, because it is it's harnessed by the bank, by the birth certificate security. And I'm going to explain something here which a lot of people get very confused about. The birth certificate itself, a lot of people are running around saying, oh, the birth certificate is a security, it's worth millions. You know, I can write to the United States Treasury and sort of cash it in, or I can use it to borrow against. I can take it along somewhere and say, this is a security. It's worth $100 million. Give me a line of credit against it, and all sorts of crazy stuff, right? You cannot monetize it, and you cannot cash it in. And the reason why is because it's a mechanism that has been used to harness the use of the human energy. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more difficult to understand, but I'm going to try my best to explain it. The birth certificate is registered as a security for the benefit of the original creditors. So the original creditors are the bloodline banking family that bailed out the United States in 1933. So it is collateral that is already being used by the original creditors. It does not belong to the living soul. They are the agent for the birth certificate construct, but they are not. They don't have any right of ownership of that birth certificate security as a collateral value. The future value of the labor of the living soul has been offered up as security to the original creditors, the bloodline banking families that bailed out the United States. So if you imagine that the whole world is gradually gone into bankruptcy, and all of the assets had to be used as collateral to underpin the bailout. So the bailout was given by the bloodline banking families. They, like JP Morgan and others, they provided the credit to bail out the United States in exchange for taking a charge over all of the assets. Well, the assets include the birth certificate as securities.
Yeah.
So they're holding those as security, as collateral, along with the land and the property and the infrastructure and anything else that's got any tangible value. So then what then happens is the banks are given this accounting exemption. It's very clever, right? So the banks are they're giving this accounting exemption, but as debtors. So the banks are debtor entities as nominees for the living soul who's going to put energy into the system through the signature, right? So the banks operating as debtors, they can use that credit energy as long as they pay tax for its use.
For the use of it, okay.
Because they're debtors and because they're nominees, they're fiduciaries for the living soul, they have to pay tax for the use of the human energy. And that is what they pay. That's the 945 tax module. So the banks, they can, as debtors, use the human energy. It doesn't belong to them. They have to pay tax to keep on using it. And the fact that they're paying taxes on the human energy, on the 945 tax module, it's that is the giveaway. That is the smoking gun, as I call it. Because if they were true debtors, if they weren't bankrupt themselves, if they weren't debtors, why would they need to pay tax on the human energy? They only pay tax on the human energy because they're in fact debtors paying tax for using the energy that doesn't belong to them because they're nominees. So the giveaway is the taxes that they pay on the 945 tax modules.
Okay. So that's really significant then for people to understand that, number one, they're paying taxes. Number two, there is actually a module for it with the Treasury. This Form 945 tax module is specifically for taxes to be paid against human signature credit energy. It does exist. There are other modules as well, but that to me was very significant. The fact that it even exists in the first place should tell you something.
When you look at what is the 945 tax module, what do they put into it? You know, what are the taxes that the banks are paying for? You know, what is creating this taxable event? Well, the taxable event is created through the fact that the ex nihilo credit, so the signature creates the credit at zero value at the outset, very high future value, face value. That is what they call 1099 OID, or it's an original issue discount. So the future value of these debt instruments, $1 million mortgage, future value, million, it's created at zero. The difference between $1 million and zero is discounted year by year, depending on how long that security has got to run. That is what the banks are paying tax on, because they effectively are the future value of the human energy is very high. They get to use it. They discount its use value each year through the original issue discount accounting mechanism, and they're paying taxes, or they should be paying taxes on the 945 tax module equal to the value of the human energy, the face value of the human energy. That is the mortgage face values, the debt face values. But they don't. What they do is they underfund it because because it's voluntary. And this is also another very important point. It's a voluntary tax. They're not compelled. Right. You see, if they were compelled to pay tax on the 945 tax module by the United States Treasury, then they'd have to fund the taxes at the correct level. But they're not compelled because it's voluntary. And that's another giveaway, in that the system has been designed so that the banks can disguise it. They can minimize the effect of the 945 payments that they're making, to minimize it so that people don't really notice it too much. Because it's voluntary, they don't fund it at the correct level. And that's a deliberate way that the legislation has been drafted, so that it enables the banks to get away with their deception.
I think you said that it's around 1% of where it should be in terms of what they actually pay. So they genuinely are paying the bare minimum. So let's talk a little bit about the rectification of this then. We're talking about mortgage discharge here. So again, from a layman's perspective, if I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I kind of understand that. So when I went to the bank and I signed those mortgage documents, I actually created an asset there. I created this credit through my signature energy, and that it's my now 25 years of work and labor and toil and blood, sweat and tears that is backing that up, because I've said I'm going to pay it back. So I created the value. My local bank then decided to create a debt. That's the liability that I now have to pay back with interest. So I'm kind of understanding that part. And then from what Ian said, that mortgage note that I signed, the bank within typically within 3 months, would have sold that on to the investment banks, got it out of UK jurisdiction if it was me in the UK. So it's now off our plate, not our problem. We've got a charge against the property that this guy wanted to buy. He's agreed to pay it back for 25 years. So we've sold the security on. We've made money selling the security. We're also getting monthly payments from this guy, plus interest now for the next 25 years. Happy days for the bank. And then if it's gone to the US at that point, and it's gone into these huge buckets that you call tranches, and the best way I can kind of describe that to somebody is, if it's a big bucket, mine's in there, yours is in there, thousands of others are in there, all with our names on them. You know, they're securities that we created. But then what the banks do is they give the bucket a name, something completely different. It'll have a reference number to it. It's a QSIP number, isn't it? But it'll have a completely different name, and they will split the title so that we, as the people that own the pieces of paper in that bucket, essentially we have what's called beneficial title or beneficial ownership, whatever it's called. And then the banks claim ownership over the bucket itself, give it a completely different name. So it's very smoke and mirrors. We can't really see or know what's in it. And then they trade that and they make a shit ton more money on the back of that, basically. That's what's going on. And because they own the bucket, but they don't own what's in it, they're paying taxes for the privilege of doing that. And that's what's sitting on the 945. So if they're paying taxes on my mortgage note, my credit card, my loan that I created, those taxes really should belong to me, because apparently I'm the beneficial owner. I'm the person that created it in the first place. So if people are kind of keeping up with this for the first time and it's starting to make sense, for me, the next logical question would be, well, if those taxes belong to me, how do I get them back? Because everybody loves a tax rebate. Don't know anybody that doesn't. So can you talk to me a little bit now about the Clifford protocol? Because this is something that we've discussed in great detail, where we've broken this down. And I know that people can go and watch those videos. But to fix this accounting error, shall we call it, your protocol for mortgage discharge introduces sort of a 2-track strategy here. So why do we first of all start by creating a trust to kind of put ourselves into the right positioning to be able to recover those taxes? What's the trust side of things all about?
Well, the birth certificate construct can't file tax returns, can't file 1099 OID, can't redirect taxes back to it because it's a debtor entity and it doesn't have any standing to receive tax redirection, and it can't file 1099 OID and correct the ledger because it doesn't have the standing to do so. So the first step of the Clifford protocol, after you've identified where the securities are, which bank is holding them, what's the QSIP number, which 945 tax module are the taxes being paid on. Once you've established that, then you can create a foreign grantors trust, which becomes the creditor. It's not the creditor when it starts off, because it's just a trust with an EIN number. But once it's filed 1099 OID, it then has become what's called the holder in due course. So as the holder in due course, it can command the transference of the mortgage note to the grantor trusts for the benefit of the grantor trust as the creditor. So whereas the banks are holding all of these mortgage notes as if they are the holder in due course, which they're not because they're nominees, as soon as the foreign grantors trust files 1099 OID, having identified the QSIP number where the mortgage is being held, the EIN number of the bank that is paying taxes on the 945 tax ledger, now the the top of the ledger, if you think of it like an accounting ledger, has to recognise the fact that the investment bank, who never was the holder in due course, definitely isn't the holder in due course now. The Foreign Grantors Trust is the holder in due course, which is written up in IRS publication 1212 as the creditor. It then, so the note, and this goes back to the Bills of Exchange Act of 1882, basically when that promise was initially made, the signature was made to create the mortgage, the note was just floating around in the banking area as the clearing bank to the investment bank, seeding company, etc. Nobody ever claimed the collateral value or the creditor position of that note. So the banks presume it belongs to them, but they don't claim it to belong to them. But when the Foreign Grantors Trust claims it by filing 1099 OID, as it says in IRS publication 1212, now that note, that mortgage note, if it was your mortgage, there's no way that the bank, the investment bank, can say it's theirs, because there is a electronic filing that has gone into the United States Treasury from the Foreign Grantors Trust that is evidence that that particular mortgage note security has now been shifted from a presumption, which was how it was always being treated before, to an absolute fact that the Foreign Grantors Trust now has the note as collateral, and therefore the taxes that the bank's been paying for the use of it have to be redirected to the Foreign Grantors Trust.
Okay. So trust then gets set up. That trust can file a 1099 OID and basically correct that accounting error, and that it now takes holder in due course over the actual mortgage note itself and over the credit. What's then this 26-digit alphanumeric fingerprint that you talk about as well? Because I understand that is also very, very important in this process.
Yeah, I mean, the most important event is the filing of 1099 OID that gets accepted by the IRS's algorithmic filing system. Once that acceptance can be evidenced, now you've got the evidence that the ledger has been corrected, the accounting has been corrected, the mortgage has been discharged, the value of the mortgage note now is with the grantor trust, and it's entitled to the tax redirections. But the 26-digit is a string of numbers which identify where the note was originated, but with which bank, which pool tranches it being held in, which investment bank's paying tax on it, in which area, etc. So it's just really a way of identifying. It's an identification number that tracks that particular security. But it doesn't, it's very helpful to have that 26-digit reference number, but the actual proof is the CUSIP number, the 1099 OID filing, and the acceptance of the filing by the United States Treasury. It's on acceptance that generates the 26-digit reference number, but you can actually just get the proof from the electronic filing system of the 1099 OID being accepted. That in itself is sufficient evidence that the ledger has been corrected, mortgage has been discharged, and taxes are now due, redirection of taxes to the Foreign Grantors Trust. Okay.
So let's say that's now been done in terms of this mortgage discharge protocol. Let's say that we've gone through that process. They've had the trust set up, they've filed the 1099 OID, and that correction has been made. Now they are entitled to those taxes to be redirected. My next question would be, if I kind of go back to what you said about the taxes that they pay on this 945 module, it's not mandatory, it's voluntary, and they're only paying roughly 1% of what they need to pay. What happens if you were to put in a claim for those taxes to come back, and because of this sort of typical 1% rule, that there's not enough not enough money in the kitty on the 945 to pay for it. What happens then?
Well, now the Foreign Grantors Trust, which is the holder in due course, superior to the bank that's paying the taxes on their 945 ledger. If you take one Grantors Trust with holder in due course status, it can command the IRS to move taxes from the other tax modules onto the 945 module equal to its entitlement, because it is the creditor. You know, it's like you've got to always go back to bankruptcy. The bankruptcy trustee is the United States Treasury. The creditor is the Foreign Grantors Trust. It's owed the tax redirection. It has rights as a creditor. It commands the bankruptcy trustee to adjust the tax modules and make sure there's enough credited to the 945 tax module to equal its claim, because it is the creditor in this scenario.
Okay, so it can pull from surplus, move it over there, and it's not an ask, it's a command, because they have the status and the standing to be able to do that, yeah?
The Revenue Procedure 2002-2026 enables the Grantor Trust as holder in due course to command the IRS to move taxes from other tax modules to the 945 tax module, because it is the holder in due course. It is the creditor. And because the taxes are being paid on the 945 module by the debtor, which is the investment bank, on a voluntary basis, it enables the holder in due course to command the IRS. You're not going to the bank saying, hey, you've underpaid on your 945, pay more money into it. You're going to the bankruptcy trustee and commanding them to move taxes that have already been paid, but on a different module, onto the 945 module to equal the claim, which is an entitlement at law for the creditor's claim for the tax redirection. And they have all the rights because they are now the holder in due course. That's the Foreign Grantors Trust. So it's really all about who is the holder in due course. The banks presume that they are, but they're actually nominees. They use the credit, they pay taxes for the use of it, they get away with it until the Foreign Grantors Trust files the 1099 OID, and that changes the whole nature of the game.
Okay. So again, I'm playing devil's advocate here. If that's been done, if the ledger has been corrected, my next question would be, and this kind of brings us on to the next section that I want to talk about, is, you know, foreclosure. Is once that's been done by our 98 Grantor Trust, we've filed 1099 OID, we've corrected the ledger, is that openly recognized by the banks? And it's a case of, oh, okay, got it, mortgage has been paid, therefore you, Mr. Andy, you can stop paying your monthly mortgage payments now, you don't owe us a penny.
The bank that issued the mortgage is never going to recognize it. You can't write them a letter and say, hey, I've discharged the mortgage at the top of the ledger at the United States Treasury, you know, take the charge off from the charges register and, you know, see you later. I've stopped my mortgage installments now. They're not going to recognize it because they would need to be commanded by the investment bank to remove the charge. So you have to get the investment bank at the top of the ledger to recognize the fact that they no longer have the status that they thought they had, or they presume that they had, as creditor. You've got to get it removed at the top. You're never going to remove the mortgage charge in the local area just because you filed 1099 OID through a Foreign Grantors Trust in isolation, because the mortgage provider is going to say, don't recognize it. If you go to court, they're going to say, don't care, because it's not in this country. We don't care what happens in New York. We only care about the fact there's a charge. If the bank that's got the charge says that they haven't been discharged, then, you know, they're not going to listen to any 1099 OID presentments. The only place you're going to get that listened to and taken seriously is in New York, which is where the investment bank is.
Okay. So how does that process work then? Because you talk about putting in a notice of adverse claim under the Uniform Commercial Code to kind of strip the bank and the mortgage servicer of their power to going into foreclosure. How does that, from a person who's maybe not necessarily in foreclosure, but maybe potentially could be facing that because they're struggling to repay their mortgage and they're thinking, okay, I can discharge this now. But if my local bank isn't going to recognise the discharge and I then still have to continue to pay, then what's the next steps at that point?
I mean, this shouldn't really be viewed as a mortgage foreclosure protocol. It isn't. It's a mortgage discharge protocol that might work for stopping mortgage foreclosure. The problem with mortgage foreclosure is that, generally speaking, once it kicks off, once it gets in the courts in the local area, it's like a steam train that you're not going to stop by filing, by creating a foreign grantors trust, filing a case in New York, and trying to stop the case in the local area, because there's too much momentum behind the case in the local area. You can stall it, you can try and slow it down, but it's not. My protocol isn't designed for stopping mortgage foreclosure. It might do, and it should do, but it isn't designed for that. Okay. It's a byproduct of it. So it's more about mortgage discharge than stopping mortgage foreclosure. If you catch it early enough and you discharge the mortgage at the top of the ledger, and you're using and you get a court order from New York, the Southern District of New York, that this mortgage has been discharged, or what is better, a private settlement with the investment bank, because they really don't want the information about the way that they are paying taxes on the 945 tax module to come out. If you get a private settlement with the investment bank, and then the investment bank instructs the local bank where the mortgage was generated to remove the charge, that is the ultimate peaceful remedy. And then, of course, you've then got the tax redirection, which is the recoupment of the taxes and redirection of them, in addition to the fact that the mortgage has been discharged. But for people who are, weeks away from the bailiffs turning up, thinking that they can do this or engage in this protocol and it's going to stop a foreclosure, it won't, because you've probably run out of time. If you'd done it a year before, then it probably would have stopped the foreclosure, because the mortgage is discharged and the investment bank instructs the local bank to remove the charge. But if you've left it too late, then the only thing you can do is stall in the local court, discharge in New York through the 1099 OID, Foreign Grantors Trust, Southern District of New York case, but you still might run out of time, because the local court and the New York court are two separate things unless you join them together, which can be done. It's a lot of work to do it. It's called comity. It can be done, but it's much better. My protocol is not really for people in the last chance saloon. My protocol is for people that have got a mortgage. They've woken up to the reality that they are the creator of the credit. They want to discharge it. They're not in dire straits. They're not facing mortgage foreclosure. They just want to discharge their mortgage and redirect the taxes on the face value of the mortgage into their foreign grantors trust. If they decide to stop paying the mortgage because they wholeheartedly believe in this process, that's up to them. I'm not recommending that. I'm not saying people should start this process and instantly stop paying their mortgage. I'm saying that this is a way of discharging your mortgage and recouping the taxes that your foreign grantors trust will receive, which is the face value of the mortgage itself plus bank payments and maybe other mortgages as well. But it's not a sign up for the mortgage discharge protocol, and the moment you've signed up for it, you stop paying your mortgage, and if the bailiffs are coming next week, they're going to disappear because they know you've invoked a higher power against them. It's not going to work like that. It's for peaceful mortgage discharge, really.
Yeah, we definitely want to be clear about that and set the right expectations. What if, Ian? I mean, you've said that obviously the investment bank would then instruct the clearing bank to remove the charge once the mortgage has been discharged at that level. What if they don't? What happens if they don't instruct them to remove the charge?
Well, then you've got a trust fraud because the local bank that holds the mortgage charge under if it's in there's various acts in different countries, but in the UK, the Land Registration Act of 2002, they can only hold the charge if they can claim that there is a creditor a debtor relationship. If the debtor relationship is gone away because the mortgage has been discharged, then they have no lawful right of holding the charge. That's how you remove the charge. By removing the debt, it removes the charge. All the time the debt is there and the debt hasn't been discharged, you can't remove the charge. So you've got to discharge the debt to remove the charge, and then you're in you can compel the mortgage provider locally to remove the charge because there is no debt. Basically, they would then be involved in a constructive fraud because they're holding a charge over an asset where the debt is being discharged, and that's a trust fraud.
Gotcha. Okay. And then the icing on the cake, I'm assuming, with all of this is the 945 tax redirection as well. So it's not just a case of somebody being able to discharge the mortgage and discharge the debt and then remove the charge on the property that was held against it. But then you've also got, within your 98 grantor trust, the ability to redirect those taxes from the 945 module back to that trust. So just talk to me a little bit about that as well and how that would work.
Well, the overriding objective is to discharge the mortgage. That is achieved as soon as the Foreign Grantors Trust files the 1099 OID and becomes the holder in due course. The second really big benefit of this is that the face value of the mortgage is basically being abandoned, and the taxes that the investment bank is paying on the 945 tax module is due to the grantor trust, equal to the face value of the mortgage. So if you've got $1 million mortgage, you discharge it, meaning that it's gone, it's been paid off using common parlance, and then you get the $1 million recoupment, this tax redirection, which you can spend and then recoup and spend and recoup through your private treasury, which is your asset fortress protocol, your grantor trust that's been established for the private treasury purposes. So, if you start with $1 million mortgage, you end with no mortgage and $1 million of tax redirection. That's the journey. That's the aim and intention of the mortgage discharge protocol, combined with the monopoly game changer protocol.
Okay. So if you're watching this right now, what you've just heard, as it was for me, is just a complete shift. A mortgage clearly is not a life sentence of debt. It's a very, as I said before, very smoke and mirrors accounting system where the banks have been quietly capitalizing on your signature credit energy while leaving you to pay for those years. So if you can balance this ledger at the top tier of a treasury level, you strip these intermediaries of their power to be able to hold on to that. So let's be entirely honest, though, Ian. I mean, we've given an overview here of the mortgage discharge protocol, but a normal sort of, even somebody who's fairly savvy, I would say it's going to be very difficult for them to execute this forensically. A 1099 OID discharge, navigate potentially the court system. You can't just do that with basic internet searches and YouTube videos. This is quite complex, isn't it? One administrative misstep, and that could have catastrophic consequences for people. We've seen it happen before where people are filing in the wrong way. So maybe we could just sort of delve into that side of things as well, just so that people can understand, because you've just delivered a blueprint here, but we have protocols that we can administer core members for them to be able to do this, don't we? You mentioned the Clifford Protocol, the Monopoly Game Changer Protocol. So the trust structures that we have, the Envoy Protocol, the Asset Fortress Protocol, and then the signature credit recoupment as well, the tax redirection on signature credit energy applies to mortgages as well as it applies to any other kind of loan. Mortgages, credit cards, normal loans, even bank payments that leave your bank. So if someone's interested in doing this, rather than going down a potentially very risky DIY route, what would be their next steps from here?
Well, they are unlikely to be able to put all this together on their own. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult. You've got a lot of challenges. First of all, you've got to understand all aspects of it, which will take some time to grasp. Then you've got to build the infrastructure. You've got to be able to create grantor trusts. You've got to be able to get a recognised and licensed tax preparer to file the 1099 OID. You've got to be able to create a forensic report that will absolutely prove that the mortgage is in the tranche, the investment bank is a nominee, that the investment bank is paying taxes for the use of the mortgage security. So you've got to be able to create that forensic report. You've then got to be filing an adverse claim against the indentured trustee. You then got to be able to draft all the documents up to file a case against the indentured trustee in New York. You've then got to be able to create the banking infrastructure to receive the tax redirection, which is a challenge if you're not in the United States to get banking in the States to receive the tax redirection. So there's a lot of challenges there, which would make it very, very difficult. We facilitate. We don't provide a litigation service. We're not involved in providing a legal service. We don't provide some sort of claims management type service. What we do is we provide you with access to an avatar, which can explain all aspects of the mortgage discharge protocol, and another avatar that can explain the Monopoly Game Changer protocol. So you've got all the information, you've got the webinars, you've got the technical guides, you've got interviews like this, so you can get your head right around it. If you want to redirect the taxes into the Monopoly Game Changer, you can enroll in that by making a donation to the Republic of Old Souls as an ecclesiastical ministry, and that can all be facilitated for you. The grantor trust can be set up, the foreign grantors trust, the 1099 OID can be run. We can run the forensic report that enables you to be able to demonstrate that the mortgage is in this tranche, that with this CUSIP number, this investment bank is paying tax on it. That forensic report can be generated for your benefit as a forensic reporting service. So that is Ecclesia Law can generate that forensic report, and you can use templates for the filing of your case, your adverse claim, your claim in the Southern District of New York. That will enable you to basically prove that the mortgage has been discharged and that the indentured trustee has breached the Indentured Trustee Act of 1939 by holding themselves out as the creditor when in fact they're not the creditor. You can get the templates, you can use them, you file your own case in Southern District of New York. The Foreign Grantors Trust will receive the tax redirection. We facilitate the banking, so set up the banking arrangements for you for the trust, so that you can receive the tax redirections. But we're not here as a claims management firm. We're not here as a law firm. We're not going to be representing you in the Southern District of New York or anything like that. You have to get yourself up to speed. There are guides, there are documents, there's the avatar, but you'll be filing your own case. We can show you how it works through generic information, but we can't actually, we're not going to represent you in the Southern District of New York. We're not a law firm. We have the standing as a law firm. We're not a claims management firm. We don't do claims management. We don't do advising on debt. We don't do anything like that. We just provide you with the information. If you want to administer your own claim, that's up to you. And we can provide you with the tools, but we can't actually make it work for you. You have to use the tools to make it work for yourself. We can file the tax return, we can file the 1099 OID, we can facilitate the banking on the tax redirection, we can create trusts, all of those things we can do, and we do those all the time. But the actual mortgage discharge itself, you need to do that yourself. That's the filing all the documents at the Southern District of New York. We can only show you what documents can be used, but you need to basically draft them, you need to apply them, you need to serve them, file them, and all those good things. And you need to reply to any responses you get back from the indentured trustee lawyers, because invariably there'll be lawyers. If it comes to a private settlement, you need to agree that. If it comes to removing the charge from the local land registry or equivalent, you need to navigate that. We can give you all the information, we can give you the templates, but we're not here to advise you, to hold your hand, to send all your letters and respond to all the responses you get back. We don't do that.
No. So just to be clear, but this can be done. Templates can be provided. The instructions on what to do, where to file can be provided, but it's the member that has to do that themselves. We did actually have a comment in the chat from somebody as well who said, how do I get information and become proactive in doing this? Well, the best way that you can do that, there's a couple of things that you can do. If you're a member here at the Republic of Old Souls, you'll have a member account. If you want to get started with any of the protocols, the Monopoly Game Changer, or if you're specifically wanting to talk about mortgages, the best thing to do is to book a call with a consultant. So we have a consultant team here. They can sit down with you. They can run through what your specific situation is as far as your bank payments, your mortgages, your credit cards, your loans, that you can do the tax redirection on. So the best place to start is in your members area. Book a call with a consultant, get on that call, and they can direct you from there. Another great step to take if you are brand new to this would be to come to our next webinar. Ian and I are going to be running this coming Saturday. So at the time of recording this, it's Thursday, the 18th. On Saturday, the 20th of June, 10 a.m. UK time, we are going to be running a mortgage discharge protocol webinar as well. So we'd love to see you there. If you want to register for that, you can go to roswebinars.is and register for the webinar. You can also register from your members area too. So there's plenty of ways to get involved, plenty of ways to learn more about this. If you're liking the content that we're putting out here, then you can also go to the ROS Media Platform itself, rosmediaplatform.is. You'll see a whole plethora of interviews that Ian and I have done on multiple subjects, including mortgages, but also digging much deeper into the Clifford Protocol, into the Monopoly Game Changer, into the individual components that form that Monopoly Game Changer. So the Asset Fortress, the Envoy Protocol. There's plenty for you guys to get yourself educated on. You know, knowledge is power when it comes to this. The banks and the cabal, the powers that be, they don't want you to know this stuff. Of course they don't. But we've got all the information for you right at your very fingertips. And if you love technical, then I would recommend you go here. Go to ecclesialaw.is. There's around 70 technical report papers that Ian has written, breaking all of these individual things down. So if you're a reader and you like that kind of thing, some of those reports are 15, 20 pages long. There's a lot to take in, but if you go at your own pace, you'll start to learn as I did. The more you learn, the more it makes sense. But what Ian is uncovering here and what we're talking about, it makes way more sense than what you've been led to believe. So if you're sitting there thinking, something's just not right. I always felt that. I always felt something was a little bit off. Couldn't quite figure out what it was, but it just didn't seem right. And the more I learned about this, the more I realized, oh, now that makes complete sense. It really does. So that's what I would recommend you do. Go to Ecclesia Law, get yourself genned up on the technical reports. Join us on the ROS Media platform. Watch some more of the content there. If you like live content, we are live again on Saturday, 10 a.m. UK time, and you can register at the website that I gave you earlier, which is roswebinars.is. We'd love to see you there on Saturday morning. The only thing I will say about our Saturday webinars is we get way more registrations than we have seats. We only have 1,000 seats, as you can imagine. Mortgage, this is going to be a very, very popular subject. So we expect those seats to get swallowed up pretty quick. So I would recommend, with it being Thursday now, that you register as soon as you possibly can so that we can get you onto the webinar and you can benefit from me and giving a further breakdown of this. There'll be slides and visuals as well. It's going to be a really good webinar Saturday morning. So that's all I've got. Any final thoughts from yourself, Ian, before we let everybody go?
Well, my final thoughts are, as you've already said, knowledge is power. The money system can be a curse because it can trap you and enslave you, or it can be a blessing because you can use it for your advantage. But you've got to take a little bit of time out to learn how it works. I'm giving you the information and facilitating, certainly with the tax redirection, life-changing strategies that work. But I don't want you to do them unless you understand what you're doing. And as Andy's already said, there's lots of information for you to get yourself involved in. I don't think that you should do anything unless you know what it is you're actually doing. But once you start to realize how you've been fooled, how you've been duped, how you've been deceived, I think you'll want to do something about it because you'll be a little bit motivated, I think, because nobody likes the feeling that they're being cheated. And that's what's really going on. The cabal are cheating all of us through this major modern slavery banking deception. You don't have to put up with it. Once you know that you're being cheated, I'm sure you'll want to do something about it.
Excellent. Well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed today's session, and we look forward to seeing you on Saturday morning if you can join us. If not, we will be running replays of that webinar as well, but always better to be there live. Why? Because you can ask questions on the webinar. So we have a Q&A channel on that webinar. If you've got questions while Ian's unfolding this in front of you and you're thinking, oh, now I kind of get that, but I've got a question here. While that question's fresh in your mind, you can pop it in the Q&A chat. I will collate all of those together as we do every week, and we'll be back here Tuesday, Wednesday of next week covering all of your questions to give you further clarity so you can move forwards with absolute confidence with this. So have a great day. We'll see you on the next episode. Bye for now, guys.